just to jump right into it, today we're working in this environment. This is my really basic and light SharePoint 2013 environment. It consists of 2 servers. If I jump over to Central Administration and go to Manage Servers in this farm, we can see that I've got an internal mail relay that's not configured and really not relevant to what we're doing today. More importantly, I've got this SharePoint 2013A server, which, as you can see, basically just does everything. He acts as a WFE, he acts as an application server, and so on and so forth. Search is there, Excel calculation, etc. And then I've got this server called SQL, which is literally just a single standalone instance of SQL Server 2008 R2, where I'm hosting all of our SharePoint databases. Very simple farm, but you know, 2-tiered as opposed to 3, 5, 7, 10, whatever you guys might be using in your enterprises, but the principles are the same, and I think we'll be able to see and kind of internalize the different concepts that are going to make or break your success in terms of installation and then configuration of the SharePoint backup tool from the top down. Not that it's difficult, but you know, the more information you have going in, the better, right? So now that we know what we're dealing with, let's jump over to the Metalogix website. Let's go download our installation media, and we'll get started. I'm going to go to the SharePoint Backup section under the Product Downloads and Resources. I'm going to go to Downloads, and right off the bat I see that the latest and greatest version is 5.0.2822, and that's what I want to install. Note, if you're using SharePoint 2007, we can't support farm component backup for 2007 due to technical limitations in that platform. So we do still offer the older 4.x version, which leverages a different mechanism for granular backup only. We won't be covering this installation in this particular Academy session. We may do a quick take session specifically for the older version and the difference between that backup mechanism and the newer one. But for the purposes of today and next week, we're going to be focusing on the latest and greatest version, which is for 2010 and 2013, and utilizes the so-called mount concept for granular restore, which we'll talk about in the next session. So I'll go ahead and download this down to my file system. Again, so I'll go ahead and save that there. Now I've already got it, so I'm not going to re-download it, but that's where I'll be putting it. Let's just jump to the directory, shall we? So here I are with my downloaded zip file for 2822. I would extract here. I'm using 7-zip, so I've got a fun little context menu option to extract everything in one spot. And here we go. We're ready to roll. So before we get started, what will we need? Really, we're going to need at least one Active Directory service account to use for these different components. So we've got 2 primary components that are going to be leveraging these accounts. One is the management service account. He's going to need to be a local administrator on the machine he gets installed to, as well as have the ability to create and manage our repository database we're going to be creating. So he'll need to be into that, and we'll assign that by default when we create the database. I'm going to use the same account to install that I'm using to leverage those accounts or those services. So in my case, it'll be really simple. But keep in mind, the installer creates the database. That means when you install, whoever you're logged in as needs to have the DB creator role on the SQL Server instance that we are planning to use for our repository. In my case, that's this SQL machine. So I'm logged in as Roy M. I'm going to be running this installer as Roy M as administrator. And that account has DB creator on this SQL Server, which means I'll be able to create my repository database. Once it's created, the account that I assign to my management service, which incidentally will also be Roy M, needs to have DBO to that newly created database. The other component that we'll be leveraging an account will be the backup service. I happen to be using the same account for that service, but whatever service account you use needs to be a local administrator on each machine in the farm, i.e. you're going to want to use one single service account for all the backup services, and that service account is going to need to be able to basically have similar to a domain administrator privilege where he's a local admin on each of his box. Additionally, he'll need to be able to act as a farm admin. And we'll get into more detail on that when we get to those parts of the install. So I'm going to go ahead and run this bottom left option, install Sharepoint Backup. And my apologies, my throat's a little scratchy. I'm coming off of a cold. All right, so from here on, it's kind of simple. So the installation of Sharepoint Backup is really two-pronged. So I'm just closing that splash page behind us. The first phase is this phase where we're going to install the actual management service component, the console GUI, and the repository database, the so-called back end of Sharepoint Backup. Once those three components are installed, upon first run of the console, we'll be prompted to go through a so-called configuration wizard, which will include the remote deployment of any backup services that need to go on the various Sharepoint farm servers. In my scenario, I'm installing the back end to one of my farm servers, but we can distribute that installation however we like. We may have a dedicated application server that hosts our management service, a dedicated SQL server that hosts our repository, and then several remote servers that represent our farm. In my case, I've simplified it a little bit, but it can be as distributed as you want. The point here is that it's two phases. Step one, the back end, management service repository console. Step two, configuration, which includes remote deployment of backup services. And you'll see what I mean when we get to that step, for those of you who haven't seen it already. So I'm going to go next. This is all going to be pretty straightforward and familiar. We're going to accept some license terms. We're going to define where we want that, the destination of the tool. And this destination, by the way, is going to be primarily that backup management service component in the GUI. I'll click Next. We want to do a full install. A console-only install would be if I were putting the console on a workstation that I plan to manage the tool remotely from. I'm not there yet, so I'm just going to do a full install. And then I'm going to click Next. This is just a reminder that we need 7484 open on this machine that we're installing the management service to. Now remember, this management service component, we mentioned this briefly in the first session, listens for incoming traffic on 7484. That means any communications coming from his backup services are going to reach him at 7484. Thusly, we need to have 7484 open on the machine hosting that management service. This is just a reminder to make sure we have taken care of that, which I have in my case. We can always test port communications using things like Telnet or PowerShell. You know, that's the subject of another quick take session down the line, but we should be good to go here, so I'll continue. Here I'm going to define the SQL Server instance where I'm going to host my repository. It just happens to be that. The default database name is great, but I'm actually going to append an identifier for this specific farm because I happen to have multiple farms in my environment. I want to make sure I know that this particular repository is for this particular farm. Because remember, per our last meeting, there's a 1-to-1 ratio between the management service repository and a farm. So each farm we manage this tool has to have its own unique management service and its own unique backup repository. Thus, I'm identifying it with my naming convention. I hope that makes some sense. Down here we can, if we want, opt to use a SQL Server login to create this database. For instance, if we're logged in as an account right now that doesn't have the DB creator role, I can go ahead and provide an SA account or a login that does in order to manage that SQL connection and database creation. I know that my account's good, so I'm going to skip it. Now I'm going to define an AD service account for my management service to run as. I mentioned I have this Roy M account. And again, I mentioned earlier that the management service eventually needs to be able to connect to that repository database with DBO privileges. If we don't have an account to use that has that DBO privilege, we can always specify, hey, I want the management service to leverage SQL authentication to make that connection. I don't need to do that. The option is there. So our management service account is set. We're going to click install.